There is a story we tell about anger, that it is strength, that it is clarity, that it is the appropriate response of a person who has been wronged, overlooked, dismissed, or pushed too far, that it draws the line, names the injustice, refuses to be small, and sometimes, that story is true. But there is another kind of anger, the kind that has been living in the body so long it no longer needs a reason, the kind that wakes up with you, that sits at your table, that rides with you in the car and narrates the behavior of strangers and finds evidence everywhere it looks that the world is exactly as hostile as it always suspected. That anger does not protect you. That anger is the loneliest place on earth. And the terrifying thing, the thing nobody warns you about, is that from the inside, it feels exactly like strength. This is the paradox of anger. Victor was 44 years old and had not spoken to his brother in 11 years. He lived in Detroit, worked in logistics, raised his teenage son Elijah mostly alone after his marriage ended. He was the kind of man people described as passionate, intense, someone who cared deeply and wasn't afraid to show it. What they meant, though they rarely said it this plainly, was that Victor was difficult to be around for extended periods of time. He had strong opinions delivered at high volume. He had a memory for slights that was essentially photographic. He could recall with vivid, detailed precision every instance in which he had been wronged, at work, in his marriage, by his brother, by the world at large. And he held those instances close, arranged them carefully, returned to them regularly, the way other people return to photographs of people they loved. Victor called this being real, being someone who didn't pretend, didn't perform, didn't let people get away with things. What it actually was, though he would not have accepted this description for many years, was a man in permanent defense. A man who had been hurt so deeply and so early that anger had become the only emotional language he fully trusted. Victor's father had been a hard man, not cruel in the calculated sense, but hard in the way certain men of a certain generation were hard, as though softness were a structural weakness, as though warmth were something that needed to be rationed to remain valuable. Victor had grown up reaching for approval that came rarely and always felt conditional. He had learned young that the world responded to force, that the quiet boy got overlooked and the loud one got heard, that if you wanted something you had to be willing to fight for it because nobody was simply going to hand it to you. These were not entirely false lessons, but they were incomplete ones, and Victor had built his entire interior life on an incomplete foundation. The fight with his brother Raymond that ended their relationship had started over something small. It always does. A comment at a family gathering, a perceived dismissal, Raymond saying something careless, the way brothers sometimes do, without malice, without awareness of the specific nerve they are pressing, and Victor hearing it not as carelessness, but as the latest entry in a long record of disrespect he had been keeping since childhood. The argument escalated in the way Victor's arguments always escalated, quickly, completely, with a thoroughness that left no room for the other person to find their footing or offer repair. Raymond had tried twice in the years that followed. A text, a phone call that went to voicemail. Victor had not responded, not because he didn't miss his brother, he did. In the quiet moments he rarely allowed himself, he missed Raymond with an ache that surprised him with its depth. But responding would have required softening, and softening felt, to Victor, indistinguishable from surrender, from admitting weakness, from becoming a boy who reached for approval and got nothing back. His anger kept him from having to feel any of that. That was its purpose. That had always been its purpose. The moment that changed everything came from a direction Victor never anticipated. His son, Elijah, 16 years old. Quiet in the specific way of children who have learned to read the emotional weather of a household and adjust accordingly. Elijah had a friend, a close friend, the kind of friendship that sustains teenagers through the particular wilderness of adolescence, and they had argued. The details were ordinary. The rupture felt to Elijah catastrophic. He came to his father for advice, and Victor, with complete sincerity and absolute conviction, told his son what he believed. That you don't let people disrespect you. That once someone shows you who they are, you believe them. That real strength means not going back, not apologizing when you work wrong, not giving people the opportunity to hurt you twice. Elijah listened, nodded, left the room, and did not speak to his friend again. Victor felt, briefly, that he had done his job, had passed something important on. It took 3 months for him to understand what he had actually passed on. He understood it on a Sunday afternoon when he watched Elijah sit alone in his room while the sounds of other teenagers living their teenage lives drifted in from outside. When he noticed that his son had stopped mentioning friends, stopped making plans, had developed, at 16, the particular self-sufficiency of someone who has decided that needing people is a liability. Victor stood in the doorway of his son's room and saw himself. Not the strong version, not the passionate, real, uncompromising version he had curated and defended for decades. The lonely version, the one that existed underneath the anger, the one the anger had been built to protect and had instead perfectly replicated. He had handed his son a shield, and his son was using it the same way Victor had to keep the world at a safe, manageable, devastating distance. Here is where the paradox lives. Anger, in its original form, is honest. It is the body's response to violation, to injustice, to the crossing of a line that should not have been crossed. In this form, it is not only appropriate, it is necessary. It is the signal that something real has happened and deserves to be named. But anger that is never examined, never traced back to its origin, never asked what it is actually protecting. That anger mutates. It stops being a signal and becomes a stance, a permanent orientation toward the world, a pair of glasses through which every interaction is filtered for evidence of threat, and evidence, when you are looking for it, is everywhere. The colleague who didn't say good morning becomes the institution that never respected you. The friend who canceled plans becomes the proof that people always let you down. The brother's careless comment becomes the culmination of a lifetime of dismissal. The anger connects everything into a narrative of persecution that feels, from the inside, like clarity. From the outside, it looks like a man eating alone, a son sitting in a quiet room, a series of ended relationships that all concluded with the same verdict: too much, too intense, too difficult to reach. The fire that was started for warmth has burned down every house that might have sheltered you. Victor called Raymond on a Wednesday evening in November. He had rehearsed nothing, had no plan, picked up the phone before the part of him that had been running the show for 4 decades could talk him out of it. Raymond answered on the 3rd ring. There was a silence between them that contained 11 years. Victor said, "I don't want to be right anymore. I'm tired of being right." Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for that call since the day you stopped ticking up." They talked for 2 hours. Not about the argument. The argument was a surface thing. Always had been. They talked about their father, about the house they had grown up in, about the specific education and hardness they had both received, and the different ways they had carried it forward. Raymond had gone quiet with it. Victor had gone loud. 2 different responses to the same wound. Neither response had solved anything, but naming it together out loud to the one other person on earth who had lived inside the same story did something that Victor had not expected. It made him feel for the first time in a very long time that he was not alone inside his own history. The conversation with Elijah was harder, not because Elijah was unwilling, but because Victor had to say something to his son that required him to contradict years of deliberate teaching. To look at a boy he loved and say, "What I showed you was not strength. It was a wound I never learned to close. And I have been passing it to you like an inheritance, not knowing it was a debt." He told Elijah to call his friend. Elijah looked at him with the careful eyes of a teenager who has learned not to trust sudden reversals. Victor said, "I know, I told you something different. I was wrong. Being willing to repair something takes more courage than walking away. I'm just learning that. You don't have to learn it as late as I did." Elijah called his friend that night. Victor sat in the kitchen and listened to his son laugh for the first time in months. A real laugh. The unguarded kind. The kind that requires safety to exist. He had not heard that laugh in longer than 3 months. He realized, sitting there, that he had not heard it in years. That he had built a household that ran on a frequency that made that kind of laugh difficult to sustain, and that he could, if he was willing to do the work, change the frequency. It would not be fast. It would not be comfortable. It would require him to sit with feelings he had been converting to anger for so long the original feeling was barely recognizable underneath. But his son's laugh was still in the air, and Victor decided it was worth every uncomfortable inch of the journey to keep it there. The paradox of anger does not ask you to stop feeling it. Anger is real. Anger is sometimes right. Anger has started revolutions and ended injustices and drawn lines that needed to be drawn. But it asks you to look at it, to trace it back, past the most recent incident, past the last person who disappointed you, past the colleague and the friend and the brother and the careless comment at the family gathering, back to the original fire, back to the moment or the years of moments that taught you that the world was a place where you needed to stay ready, stay hard, stay defended, and then ask yourself, honestly, is the defense working? Or have you built something so impenetrable that the things you actually want, connection, warmth, ease, the unguarded laugh of someone you love in the next room, cannot find a way inside? Anger started as a fire for warmth, but you cannot live inside a fire. At some point, the work is to build something the warmth can actually reach. This has been the paradox of anger. Whatever you are defending today, whatever fire you have been tending in the name of strength, the people you love most are not afraid of your softness. They have been waiting for it